Robert Duvall was standing on a film set in 1985 when a first-time director told him to his face that his performance was embarrassing. The crew of 47 people went completely silent. What Duvall did next became one of the most talked-about moments in Hollywood for years. It was the third week of principal photography on a mid-budget drama called The Hollow Season, shooting on location in Savannah, Georgia, in the autumn of 1985. The film was a quiet, character-driven story about a Korean War veteran returning to his hometown after 30 years of silence, the kind of project that didn't get made often in the mid-'80s when studios preferred things that exploded. It had gotten made because of one name on the call sheet: Robert Duvall. He had agreed to the project after reading the script twice in a single sitting, which was not something that happened often. The writing had a plainness to it that he respected. No speeches, no manufactured revelations, just people moving through rooms and saying things that were almost but not quite what they meant. He had told his agent it was the best original screenplay he had read in 5 years. His agent had told him the director was 29 years old and had made exactly one feature film, a low-budget independent that had played at 3 festivals and grossed less than a used car. Duvall had said that was fine. The director's name was Patrick Gallo. He was, by the account of nearly everyone who worked with him that autumn, a man in the grip of something he could not entirely control, brilliant in flashes, erratic between them, and operating under a level of pressure that the experience of one previous film had not prepared him for. He had written The Hollow Season himself over 4 years, drawing from his own grandfather's story, and he carried the weight of that personal investment into every decision he made on set. This was not always a disadvantage. It gave the project an emotional specificity that a more detached director might not have found. But it also meant that when something on screen didn't match the version that lived in Gallo's head, the gap between the two felt to him like a personal failure. And personal failures, for Patrick Gallo, did not stay internal. The cast and crew had learned this in the first week. By day 3, the gaffer had started keeping a private tally of how many takes Gallo ordered before he was satisfied with a shot. By day 5, the tally had stopped being funny. By the end of the second week, the atmosphere on set had developed the specific, exhausting quality of a room full of talented professionals who are working very hard to do good work while simultaneously managing someone else's anxiety. It was not unbearable, but it was not what any of them had signed up for. Gallo was not cruel by nature. Those who knew him outside of work described someone warm, self-deprecating, genuinely passionate about film in the way that people are when they came to it, not through ambition, but through necessity, because there was simply no other way to process certain things. But on set, under pressure, with the clock running and the money counting down and the gap between what existed in his imagination and what was appearing in the monitor growing wider by the hour, something in him shortened. His notes became more cutting. His silences became more loaded. The crew learned to read the particular set of his jaw that meant the next take needed to be better than the last one, and they adjusted accordingly. Most of the time, this was manageable. The incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon during the filming of a scene in which Duvall's character, a man named Earl Briggs, sits alone at a kitchen table and reads a letter from a daughter he hasn't spoken to in 22 years. No dialogue, no movement except the hands holding the paper and the eyes moving across it. The scene was designed to carry an enormous amount of weight through almost no action at all, which is, as any actor will tell you, one of the most technically demanding things a camera can ask a person to do. Duvall had prepared for it carefully. He had spent the previous evening alone in his hotel room constructing a specific interior landscape for Earl Briggs in that moment. Not grief exactly, and not relief, but something in the space between them that doesn't have a common name. He knew what the letter said. He knew what Earl's hands would do. He knew what his eyes would find in the middle distance when they lifted from the page. He had done this kind of preparation for 50 years, and it had never once looked like preparation from the outside, which was entirely the point. There was a version of acting that announced itself, that said, "Look, here's the work, here's the effort, here's the feeling being produced for your inspection." Duvall had understood since his 20s that this version, however technically accomplished, was always a performance of acting rather than acting itself. The preparation was not the thing you showed. The preparation was what made the thing you showed unnecessary. They ran the take. Patrick Gallo called cut. There was a pause, the kind that on a film set means something is wrong and everyone knows it before anyone says a word. Then Gallo walked onto the set, stood directly in front of Duvall, and said loudly enough for the entire crew to hear, "That was embarrassing. I don't know what you think you're doing in this scene, but whatever it isn't working. It looks like a man reading a grocery list." 47 people went still. The camera operator, a veteran named Roy Castillo, who had been working in film since the late 60s and had seen most things a set can produce, later said he had never heard that particular quality of silence in 20 years of shooting. Not the silence of an argument about to happen, and not the silence of shock exactly, but the silence of people who are unsure whether what they have just witnessed is real, and who are waiting without much hope for some clarification from the universe before they have to decide how to respond. Robert Duvall looked at Patrick Gallo for a long moment. His expression, by every account from people present that day, did not change. Not a tightening around the eyes, not a shift in posture, not the almost invisible compression of the lips that signals a man swallowing something he has decided not to say. Nothing changed at all. "All right," Duvall said. "Let's try it again." That was all he said. Gallo, who had perhaps expected argument, or the quiet surgical fury that a man of Duvall's stature and 40 years of reputation would have been entirely within his rights to deploy, got neither. He got 2 words and a willingness to continue. He stood there for a moment, visibly uncertain about what to do with the absence of conflict he had half-consciously been bracing for, and then walked back behind the monitor. They reset the camera. The props were returned to their marks. The room found its working silence again, though it was a different quality of silence than the one before, charged in a way that working silences normally are not, carrying the weight of what had just been said and what had not been said in response to it. Duvall sat back down at the kitchen table, smoothed the letter flat with one hand, and waited. They ran the take again. This time, something different happened. What Duvall did in the second take was not a correction of the first take in any technical sense. He didn't slow down or speed up. He didn't add visible emotion or remove the stillness that had apparently bothered Gallo. What changed was something underneath the performance, something in the quality of attention he brought to the letter in his hands, a barely perceptible shift in his breathing, a particular weight in the way his eyes moved across the page that altered the entire temperature of the room. It is difficult to describe the difference between an actor showing you a feeling and an actor actually having one. Critics and directors and acting teachers have been trying to find the right language for it for as long as the art form has existed. The closest approximation is probably this. When an actor is showing you something, you watch the performance. When an actor is actually inside it, you forget you're watching anything at all. Patrick Gallo watched the second take on the monitor and said nothing. He watched it the way a person watches something they have been waiting a long time to see and are not entirely sure, in the first moment of seeing it, whether it is real. His hands, which had been resting on the edge of the monitor housing, went still. The line between his shoulders, which had been tight since day one of the shoot, dropped almost imperceptibly. When it ended, he still said nothing. The script supervisor, a woman named Linda Park, who had worked on more than 40 features over 2 decades and whose professional instincts Gallo trusted above almost anyone else on the production, leaned close and said very quietly, "That's the one." Gallo nodded once. He stood up from behind the monitor. He walked back onto the set. He stood in front of Robert Duvall again. The crew watched without appearing to watch, in the careful way that crews do when something important is resolving and everyone needs to know the outcome without being seen to need it. "That's what I needed," Gallo said. His voice was different now, quieter, the pressure that had been driving it all week gone. "I'm sorry about what I said before. That was out of line." Duvall looked at him for a moment. "How old is your grandfather?" he asked. Gallo blinked. "He passed, 4 years ago." Duvall nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he's confirmed something he already half knew. "This film is for him," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Gallo said. Duvall was quiet for a moment, not the heavy silence of a man gathering himself for a speech, but the simple quiet of someone taking time to say the right thing instead of the first thing. "Then you need to trust the script," he said finally. "You already wrote what this needs to be. My job is to find it, not to show you I've found it. Those are two different things. The first take, I was showing you. The second take, I stopped showing you and started being there. That's the whole difference. There isn't any other difference." Gallo held his gaze for a long moment without speaking. He walked back behind the monitor, called the next setup in a steady voice, and the day's work continued as if nothing unusual had occurred. Roy Castillo said later that in 40 years working on sets, he had witnessed 2 or 3 moments he would describe as genuinely instructive about what acting was. This was one of them. Not because of the second take, though the second take was extraordinary. Because of the 2 words between the first and the second. Because of what a man with every right to walk away chose to do instead. What happened over the following weeks on the set of the Hollow season was not dramatic and was not announced. There was no single conversation in which everything was reset, no moment where Gallo stood before the crew and acknowledged what had changed. Change on a film set, when it happens the right way, doesn't announce itself. It shows up in the dailies. It shows up in the way people move through the space between setups. It shows up in the fact that 3 weeks after the kitchen table scene, Roy Castillo realized he had stopped keeping his private tally. What happened was not dramatic and was not announced. No relationship was declared. No speeches were made about creative partnership or mutual respect. What changed was simply that Patrick Gallo stopped performing his authority over the production and started exercising it. And the distinction, invisible to anyone who hasn't felt both sides of it, made everything easier. The crew relaxed. The performances deepened. The days ran shorter because fewer takes were driven by anxiety and more were driven by clarity. The Hollow season was completed on schedule and under budget. When the film was released the following spring, Duvall's performance received the kind of notices that actors spend entire careers hoping to see. Several critics identified the kitchen table scene, a man alone with a letter, almost nothing happening on the surface, everything happening underneath it, as one of the finest pieces of screen acting of the decade. One review described it as a masterclass in the difference between doing nothing and meaning everything. Patrick Gallo won the Independent Spirit Award for Best Director. In his acceptance speech, he said that he had nearly destroyed his own film in the 3rd week of shooting by confusing his personal investment in the material with permission to treat the people around him carelessly. He said he had been corrected on this by someone whose opinion he had not expected to matter to him, but who turned out to understand the story he was trying to tell better than almost anyone who had actually lived it. He did not name the person. He didn't need to. Robert Duvall, asked about Patrick Gallo in a later interview, was brief in the way he was brief about most things that mattered to him. "He wrote something true," Duvall said. "First-time directors who write something true are the most dangerous people on a set because they want it so badly they can't always see it clearly. My job was to see it for him until he was steady enough to see it himself." He paused. "What he said to me that day, that was just fear. Fear comes out sideways sometimes. I've done the same thing. Most people have if they're honest about it." The interviewer asked whether he had ever considered walking off the production after what happened. Duvall looked at them with the expression of a man for whom the question had genuinely not occurred before this moment. "No," he said simply. "The script was too good. If this story stays with you, if you've ever chosen to keep working when you had every right to walk away, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit that notification bell." More stories about the real character behind Hollywood's greatest careers are on the way every week.